Today is June 12th, a special day dedicated to commemorate the 25th anniversary of democratic rule in Nigeria. 25 years of uninterrupted democracy in Nigeria. That's special. What is special with also to welcome you to this special edition of Early Exchange, where we shape policy and advance development with our conversation. I am Femi Ayodele. Today is going to be special because we understand, there's a holiday in Nigeria, and wherever you are joining us, you're on holiday. It's a good time, and as you spend the next 2 hours with us, we are set to make your day worthwhile and make it productive. It's a special one. We call it June 12th special, which is for us to look at the state of the nation 25 years after uninterrupted democracy. What are the lessons for the nation? We're also going to look at the state of the economy, and also we're going to talk about the June 12th struggle and what should be the narrative for our nation. Don't forget, you can be part of this conversation. All you just have to do is to join us on our social media platform, on our YouTube page, using the hashtag Early Exchange. And my question to you is, where were you in 1993 when the fiercest election took place? Like we always say, Early Exchange will always get bigger and better. Today, the presentation is getting bigger. We have more hands. I'm not alone. We have Blessing here. Blessing, how are you today?
I'm great, Femi. Good morning. I'd like to say happy Democracy Day to you, my fellow Nigerians. You asked the question, where were you in 1993? Well, I wouldn't want to say, yes, I'm revealing some information that may not be for your consumption. But I think that all Nigerians are glad that 25 years, Nigerians have had uninterrupted democracy, and we're grateful to God for it. We're grateful to the heroes that fought for it. So we're looking at what are the gains so far, 25 years as a country that practices democracy. Let's look at the economy, look at every aspect of Nigeria as a nation. Like Femi, who I like to refer to as a prophet, he often says that the show gets bigger and better. So to my right, someone is bigger. To my left, oh yes, every exchange has gotten bigger. I would like to call today's edition the show where Abuja meets Lagos. That is to say, SOUQ News Abuja converges with SOUQ News Lagos. So I have Ayola, who's here from Abuja, and courtesy of Democracy Day, he is also an anchor on Early Exchange today. And by my left, I have the beautiful dancer who looks like she's just waiting to get into the celebration hall, and partly because Nigeria's democracy is 25 years. So I also have Joy. Good morning, Joy.
Good morning to you too. It's wonderful to be here.
Let me put this to you. Where were you in 1993?
In 1993, I mean, I don't want to share that. If I have to actually go back 1993, oh well, I was in diapers. I was in diapers, so no.
I'm on the safe side. Actually, I wasn't born yet.
Don't tell me you're a Gen Z. Interestingly, I also followed the campaign. If I remember, I was at the polling unit and I was singing the campaign song for MKO, and policemen had to checkmate me that, no, you don't do that here. So that memory still lingers, and I still have a fond of what happened in 1993.
Talking about Gen Z, a funny thought just came to me. Nigeria's democracy is Gen Z. That means it is modern, and that means that there are so many things that Nigeria can achieve with this 25-year-old democracy.
Joining us in this conversation is a special guest. We are privileged to host a special one. He's a man of many parts. We have joining us virtually from the United States, Professor Pat Utomi, who is a professor of political economy and management expert. He's a fellow of the Institute of Management Consultants of Nigeria and also the founder of Center for Value in Leadership. Prof, glad you have you join us on Early Exchange this morning. Good to see you again.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be able to join you.
All right, great. It's been 25 years of uninterrupted democracy in Nigeria. I would like to start by asking, where were you in 1993? What memories come to mind? And how do you feel on a special day like this that we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of democratic rule in Nigeria?
First of all, it's important that we be precise with definitions. There's a lot of controversy over what democracy is these days around the world, not just in our country. But civilian rule, yes, we have had 25 years of uninterrupted civilian rule in Nigeria. But regarding June 12th, wow, it's quite a question to ask somebody like me. Many people, when they think of June 12, 1993, think of people like me, because in many ways, except for a young generation that was not born back then, in many ways people like me symbolize June 12. Well, first of all, on the 12th of June in 1993, I was living in Victoria Island on Bishop Aboyade Cole, just close to where the KPMG head office is today, almost opposite it. 850 Bishop Aboyade Cole was where I lived in 1993. I went down the street close to where the ExxonMobil building is. There's a primary school just opposite ExxonMobil. That's where I voted. Having voted in the famous option A4, I was obviously in the middle of so many things, given that first of all, the chief of the Electoral Commission at that time, Professor Humphrey Mosu, was my teacher, and I was quite friendly with him. I was in the first class of public administration, he taught at the University of Nigeria in SOUQ in 1973. He'd just come back from his PhD, and I was fortunate to register for that class. And so I followed him keenly, personally. And when he brought out the option A4, there were all kinds of naysayers and all kinds of perspectives, where it turned out to be a brilliant cut. So on that day, I voted and returned. Oh, well, first of all, we all stood on the queue. They counted. We knew what the outcome was, and we were all able to send the exact tally from our polling booths. So by that evening, we knew who won the election. We knew how everything went. As you suggested in your introduction, very, very free and fair election. Before I left 2 days after the election, announced the results had not been announced. People were in suspense, wondering why, because it would have been possible to announce the results that night if they wanted to. I left to come to the United States for a convention. Incidentally, Kola Abiola was traveling that same night. We met at the airport. He was flying to London. I was flying to New York. And I was in the US when the annulment was announced, and I was full of anger that all the effort of the Nigerian people would be brought to that. I withdrew from the convention floor of the World Convention of the Full Gospel Businessmen's Fellowship, which was at the Marriott in Boston, and went back to my room and immediately typed an opinion piece that was titled, "We Must Say Never Again." And I faxed that to The Guardian. The Guardian published the piece. By the way, there were no emails in those days, sent it by fax. And then the piece aroused a lot of passion in Nigeria, people who were very upset and were writing back. So what should we do? I then had to write a follow-up piece. That follow-up piece, I invited two friends of mine, Tedo Peterside and Sam Oni, to co-sign with me. And that resulted in the founding of what came to be known as the Concerned Professionals. My thesis, my argument was that professionals cannot pretend that this is a problem of politicians. Freedom must be defended. If people don't realize that freedom is high value, they will lose that freedom. And that's the case today. And so people rallied around those ideas that I raised. We called a meeting at the engineering auditorium, engineering close in VI. It was full of professional people, chief executives of companies, all kinds. And that became how the concerned professionals got entangled in struggle for democracy. Many of us were exposed to all kinds of challenges in the struggle. I was then, by the way, chief executive, if you will, of one of the biggest manufacturing companies in the country. But I did not think of who I was. I marched on the streets of Lagos in protest, led protest, had the butt of police batons on my body a couple of times in front of Western House at St. Peter's Ajele, and my glasses, flew into the air and was on its way. But that was part of our struggle to ensure that the next generation would have democracy. So this is my recollection of June 12. I, by the way, suffered 2 assassination attempts from state terror. The government of the day had assassins that killed people like Kudirat Abiola and tried to kill people like myself before God's special intervention led to my actually leaving the country, not realizing they were trying to assassinate me. And stories, history today.
It's good to know, Prof, that you survived the assassination attempt, and then that's why we have you here to talk about June 12. You've talked about the experience that you had and how it was fighting for democracy. So now Nigeria's had 25 years of uninterrupted democracy, and President Tinubu this morning made an address to Nigerians. Let's take a listen to a part of that, and we'll come back to you. Please listen.
Must remind ourselves that no matter how complicated democracy may be, it is the best form of governance in the long run. We must also be aware that there are those among us who will try to exploit current challenges to undermine, if not destroy, this democracy for which so much has already been given. This is the great battle of our day and the major reason we specially celebrate this day as Democracy Day. The true meaning of the day is not to focus solely on the great deeds of the past that have brought us to this point. Yes, we pay eternal honor to those who laid down their lives, sacrificing everything to pave the way for the nation. I stand uniquely placed in this regard, and I was among those who took the risk to midwife the birth of our democracy. I am now a direct and obvious beneficiary of the fruit of those historic efforts. As a president of this nation, I am morally and constitutionally bound to preserve this precious form of governance. I vow to do my utmost best to protect your rights, freedom, and liberty as citizens of Nigeria.
Yes, there we have it, the speech of President Bola Tinubu this morning to Nigerians celebrating 25 years of uninterrupted democracy. Now, in that speech, he talked about his role in midwifing the democracy that Nigerians currently enjoy and his commitments to ensuring liberty, that Nigerians are free and enjoy democracy. Now, one of the things that he mentioned further into the speech was that Nigeria's economy for decades had been in need of a reform, which his administration has initiated some reforms, though occasioned by hardship. And then he went further to say that despite the hardships, the reforms are necessary to fix the economy that has been in a state of disrepair. Now, in your assessment of what the president has said and the speech, what is your view on some of the issues that he raised there, particularly regarding the reforms initiated by President Tinubu's administration to fix Nigeria's economy?
I think that sometimes the problem of protecting democracy, which I say is in crisis the world over. In fact, if you follow intellectual reflections on democracy, you will see that in Western Europe, there is the ascendance of the far right. In the United States, the Trump surge. All of these are considered part of threats to the traditional views of democracy. In Africa, Nigeria is considered a rise in fascism, actually, where government by propaganda and bullying of people to prevent them from voting is increasingly becoming a norm, the path of fascism. And so when you consider all of those, you have to look at the challenge of the economy in context. And as I've argued, the biggest problem with Nigeria is that Nigeria has not managed to found political parties. We create these election machines for being able to announce yourself president or governor or whatever positions of public authority there are. We don't realize that there is a continuation of outcome in terms of what those bodies do. The Nigerian economy has been traveling south for many years, and everybody who is a part of a political party should take ownership of why it was traveling south. I could tell you without batting an eyelid or without any procrastination 9 years ago that the Buhari government was going to be a tragedy for the Nigerian economy. And I did say so. Even though I was a part of the party that brought him to power, I was part of the writing of the roadmap. But within a few weeks, General Buhari was making comments that were completely contrary to what direction the economy should travel. He had not even inaugurated a cabinet. He was traveling around the world and making statements that I found frightening for the future of the Nigerian economy. At the launching of the Ibadan School of Government and Public Policy, Professor Tunji Olokpa's initiative, but the media asked me questions about this, and I forewarned about the consequence of the comments that he was making, and we have had to live with it. The incumbent was part of that party, was a major pillar. That was when all of us could have rallied to ensure that the party stood on the path that would lead to the strengthening of the economy. But for political reasons, people kept quiet, waiting for their turn, and a mess was made of the economy. So we are all responsible. A complete mess that it is today, that we're trying to reform in one way or the other, sometimes without rigor, creating even more problems. So that's where it is. That's why we should understand the importance of political parties. It is the political parties that should build the stepping stones of how we solve problems, economic and in other realms. And so, yes, the Nigerian economy was managed so poorly that 2 economists from Columbia University actually said that Nigeria probably would be better off without a government. Having Subramanian and Javier Salah Martin showed from a welfare computation of the use of oil revenues that if we didn't have a government, Nigerians will do much better than how the government was using the resources. And the problem remains today. Look at the way the National Assembly, the presidency, uses Nigeria's resources when people are suffering in the poverty capital of the world, as we have come, unfortunately, to be known. We need to be able to have robust conversations around that. That's what makes for democracy, not civilian rule. Civilian rule is not the same thing as democracy. And so this is the real challenge of now.
Thank you, Professor. I would like to ask, what do you make generally of Mr. President's speech today, especially in context of what his administration has done since they came to power? I'd like to read a line of his speech to you. He says, where other forms of government impose against the will of the people, Democracy aims to make leaders sufficiently humble that they conduct themselves as servants of the common good, not as viscerals of the narrow interest of the mighty. But we see, contrary to this paragraph, that since the president came into office, the issues that has been resolved are exactly the interest of the mighty. He has awarded a coastal road to his business associates. He has resolved the OOPL oil issue. Also, majorly to the favor of his business associates. So do you think that President Tinubu is leading this country just merely to serve his own interest and the interest of his associate, contrary to what he tells the Nigerian people?
One of the real problems of Africa, and I think it's important not to, be, oh, this person did this, that person. Look at trends. There's a very dangerous trend in Africa in which the pursuit of public office is really a transaction for state capture. When the South Africans realized that they were traveling in the wrong direction regarding state capture under Jacob Zuma, they set up a commission, the Zondo Commission. And the object of the Zondo Commission was to establish where state capture creeps up and prescribe the course of action. I served on the boards of South African companies during that season. And this dominated private boards. People were afraid of how to do business with the government because they didn't want to be caught in a state capture accusation. In Nigeria, there's a reckless disregard for boundaries. And so we find that most people who seek public office are just pursuing state capture. And this has been dangerous for the development of the economy, for our prioritizing, and for just plain decent governance, not to talk of good governance. This is the situation in our country today, I must say. But because our democracy is not thriving, because we live in government by propaganda, because we live in a situation where extreme partisanship does not even allow you to make a comment, the media is co-opted and all of that, Nigeria is in a very dangerous place today. So I think we need robust public conversation on the issues in our country, boundaries and all of that. Public accountability issues are huge and we have to deal with them. What people have done around the world in recognizing this tendency is that civil society has become more and more robust in the way it responds to issues of public accountability. Unfortunately, we don't do enough in our country. And citizens must realize that if they are not on guard, the consequence can be very dire for them. And so people need to wake up to holding government accountable. You can't tell me that in a country at the time people were going through such pain and difficulty, Nigerians can't even buy a tuber of yam, so yam is being sliced into bits, that it makes sense to buy a car for 160 million for a legislator. What is the value they're adding to the economy in the legislature? Let them tell me. I'm willing to sit and debate anybody, from Tinubu himself to anybody, to Babio and everybody else. I can stand to and debate these issues in terms of the welfare function of Nigeria. Why do we go to a road project like the Lagos-Calabar Highway and without any studies, without environmental impact assessments coming in, without anything, we begin to spend money? In many parts of the world, that would be an impeachable offense. Where was it budgeted for? And so on and so forth. We've got problems, and we've got to deal with those problems before we can be taken seriously as a democracy.
Prof, I like how you ended that speech there. We need to deal with the problems that we have. But 25 years is something to celebrate. We must be doing something right. I mean, beyond Nigeria, Nigeria is still considered a symbol somewhat of democracy. So how would you suggest that, looking at the political terrain, we can all, I mean, citizens can consolidate to keep our democracy and what people now call true democracy, ensure that it reflects what people really need at this time?
Well, I have to be very honest with you. We have a way of playing ostrich in Nigeria, burying our heads in the sand and pretending. You know, we shouted for years, giant of Africa, giant of Africa. African countries were overtaking us left, right, center, mocking us, and we're making noise, giant of Africa. Today, when the world thinks of democracy in Africa, they think of Kenya. They don't think of Nigeria. And so let's stop this self-deceit. Let's get real and look at ourselves and say, what's going wrong in Nigeria? A country of tremendous potential in so many ways, but because leadership is so narcissistic, so self-love driven for one generation now, the result has been that we are a poorly governed country, not making progress. Let's be honest to ourselves. And the only way we can really make progress if the citizens take over their country. The political class have proved ineffectual, proved to be driven so completely by transactions and personal interest that the people have to take their country back for it to work in the way that it can work. Because Nigeria is gifted, talented. I mean, I'm speaking to you from North America. 70% of the doctors of color in the United States of America are Nigerian. Yesterday, I had quite a number of them on a virtual meeting, looking at how we can create a transformation of the Nigerian healthcare system. Cardiologists from Atlanta, neurosurgeons from California, even mental health specialists from Sydney in Australia. It was an amazing phenomenon, this meeting. And they were willing to volunteer X number of hours every week from their time to use technology, apps to offer free treatment to Nigerians in rural areas and all of that. When you have these kinds of talents as Nigeria, and Nigeria is the way it is, we've got to be able to call a spade and tell the political class that they've made a mess of a country of tremendous potential because of their selfishness. We had a citizen legislature in Nigeria in the 60s. Legislators came from around the country to make laws and went back, rode bicycles were the official, were their mode of transportation in wherever they came from. And they came to Lagos, stayed in legical flats, made the laws, went back and rode their bicycles. I give examples all the time of people that people know so that it's not like stories. The famous singer Onyeka Onwenu, her father was a legislator. Chris Anyanwu's father was also, and Onyeka would tell you stories of how her father will come back. He was principal of an Etonian high school in Port Harcourt. And after his work in parliament, come back and borrow money from her mother and ride his bicycle. Compare that to the legislature of today. And you ask me, do we know what we are doing really? Compare that to executive. The governor of that time had 1 or 2 cars maximum. Governor that ran the whole of northern region. His ministers, when they travel with him to events, got mileage allowance. Look, in Lagos there, a federal minister traveled to his hometown, Abeokuta, and there was a breakdown on the way. He stopped and used a mechanic to fix it. When he got back, he made a claim for use of that car. Dr. Pafora, former ambassador, tells this story all the time. And this, when he made the claim, the permanent secretary looked at the receipt and found that the work was on a Saturday. And he queried why the minister used official car on a Saturday. The prime minister had to intervene because that minister was very close to Balewa. He was begging them that he should be demoted to a lower grade ministry instead of being fired from the cabinet. This is the same Nigeria that we are in. A priest who lived to pass his centenary birthday, Monsignor Pedro Martins, Used to be at St. Gregory's there in Obalindi. The Prime Minister's residence was around the corner in Unikon there. And he tells the story of how his beetle, I believe, broke down. And a car that was passing stopped. It was the Prime Minister going home and asked his car to go and drop the priest in St. Gregory's while he walked home. I mean, this is civilization.
Me, Prof.
This is Nigeria.
We have
and here
so
we
much
are
to
today.
discuss with you, but because we don't have enough time, so let's just see how we can manage this privilege of having you on this program. Now, let's revisit the call for restructuring in Nigeria. Several Nigerians have called for restructuring. And if you look at the trends, there are several misgivings and even misconceptions as regards the issue of restructuring. Now, what do you think should be the ideal when it comes to restructuring? And what should be the narrative for Nigeria when it comes to restructuring, for it to also reflect the visions of the founding fathers and to ensure that Nigeria has the right leadership? So if Nigeria is going to embark on restructuring, what are your recommendations?
Well, everything is important when it's based on principles. And there's a simple principle called subsidiarity. Subsidiarity is that the levels of government closest to the people are the more effective ones. And so we need to revamp our, lists of who has authority over what. If the principle that the center focuses on a number of things like external affairs and subnational governments deal with issues of trade and economic development are fairly established in the consciousness of people, then it is a lot easier to deal with the challenge of decentralizing. There have been so many other dimensions to decentralizing. But I think that if we establish very broad principles, that will be easier to go down. What happened, I think, unfortunately to us, is that oil came at a time that the military, who are a centralized authority, were in power. Oil became a factor. Yes, it was found in 56 in commercial quantities, but it became a factor in the 70s, and the military, who were in power and just centralized everything, caused the country to travel a different path. If you go back to all the major developments in the economy, they were done at the subnational level in the 60s. The industrial estates from Ikeja driving competition and the Eastern region responding with Aba and Trans-Amadi in Port Harcourt, a northern region with Kakuri Industrial Estate. You saw that there was competition amongst the regional governments, subnationals, and this was what led to real growth and development. It must focus on how, our factor endowments can drive competition between subnationals so that growth will take place. That is still the fundamental principle.
Take a look at governance in Nigeria. Now, there have been issues of corruption, transparency, accountability with every government in Nigeria, dating back to the 1999 when Nigeria came back onto a democratic rule up till now. Now, you were founder of Center for Value for Leadership. Governance or government is not an island. It comprises of people from society which it leads. What are the values that should be built up in leaders to the extent that the government that we have, the pilot democracy in Nigeria, is free of these issues?
Well, first of all, motivation is critical. It's important for people to realize that you go to public office not to get rich. You go to public office in pursuit of immortality, so that people will remember your name long after you were gone. A Ghanaian highlife musician, Ben Bracco, he basically said, and I never forget it, that a country where the politicians are richer than the businessmen is a country on the verge of collapse. And if you look at public culture in Nigeria, we just expect that the politician will be rich. And so people who are looking for things turn to politicians because they are supposed to have money. And that's wrong. Politicians are usually not rich people. It is the businessmen who are rich. Politicians are people who facilitate social progress. And it is their name that is their biggest accomplishment. And so people have to make the choice. Do they want to get rich? Okay, go into business. Do you want to serve people and have a name that lasts forever? Go into politics. So, humility in coming to public life and recognizing that it's not a place for great comfort. So when I hear legislators say, we need this kind of car for our work, roads in Nigeria are not good. I mean, there's no bigger self-indictment. It's your business to make sure the roads are good. And the public shouldn't feed your comfort. We should restructure the compensation system. Look, economics is a science of incentives. If people who are making laws and implementing government action think that they should take more out of the system, then the incentive will be for everybody to go in there, and the kinds of things that are happening will happen. We've got to reduce the prestige of public life and have a more balanced elite so that people can go into all kinds of things, whether it's civil society, whether it's private sector. Prestige should come from all that. But in Nigeria, nothing happens until a government official has shown up at an event, for example. When I have events, I don't invite government officials because it is a waste. Look, these people are busy. They're supposed to be working. But Nigerian government officials don't work. They spend half of the time going to activity because the activity has not happened unless this big man from government shows up. And so they become just ceremonial fops who add no value to society. We've got to change that culture. That is the big problem with Nigeria. So whatever small time they have in their office, they're busy looking at what can come out from what contractor for them. And that's not public life. Public life is about sacrificial giving of self for the good of society so that you can attain immortality.
Thank you, Professor. I'd like us to take a look at freedom of speech and expression in Nigeria in the last 25 years, and more specifically to the last 1 year of President Tinubu's administration. Do you think we are on the right path, or we are on track to a more broad civic space?
Far from it, I think we are on the very, very wrong track. In fact, I've tried to compare the situation in Nigeria today with the situation in Weimar Republic in Germany that led to the ascendancy of Joseph Goebbels and of Hitler ultimately. And we need freedom of expression. The media is too compromised in Nigeria, too co-opted. Everybody's bought. Everything is about propaganda. That's not how to... Look, democracy and modernity come together at the point that the German philosopher Jürgen Habermas describes. This philosopher of the public sphere, as he's often called, says democracy really happens when there is rational public conversation, a marketplace of ideas. So modernity and democracy meet at that point. Unfortunately, there's too much placed on propaganda, lambasting this person, abusing that person. Let's have rational conversation. If we can have that, then democracy would thrive. But if we keep bullying people out of their points of view, releasing attack dogs in social media on people, we won't have democracy. And we will just crawl into fascism. Look, the people in Germany didn't realize what happened to them, just creeping before they woke up one day and they were all sucked into it. Check what the German elite said about what happened to them after World War II, because they didn't believe that they were there and saw it happen. In fact, one of the more famous remarks from World War II, a reverend gentleman who Martin Niemöller, said first they came for the communists, and I said, oh, well, I'm not a communist. Then they came for the whoever else. I said, I'm not an. And then they came for the Catholics. I said, oh, thank God I'm not a Catholic. When finally they came for me, of course they came for the Jews much earlier. When finally they came for me, there was no one left to speak up. Nigerians must realize that what happens to Lagbaja can happen to you. And so when something happens to Lagbaja, you better start shouting now. Otherwise, you'll be watching and it will come to you.
Exactly. Prof, I like what you said there, that what happens to one person would indeed reflect on others. And the just concluded elections, that's the 2023 elections, exposed this ethnicity and the pocket of diversity we find. That the diversity should bring about the beauty and color that Nigeria should indeed put forward. However, even politically exposed individuals grappled on that to push forward their personal interests. Now, moving forward, for our democracy's sake, for our unity's sake, how can we do away with these divisive components that we often bring about, push to the people, which often pushes and brings about these ethnic tensions we often report about?
Yeah. When our politics is issues-based, when it's about, look, we don't have enough buses in Lagos, and we can rationally discuss the problem of solving bus supply, you're not likely to get the kind of divisive ethnic, jingoism that you get. When our politics is about how to advance the common good, and all religious leaders are talking about common good, then the politics will be without those divisive tendencies. Yes, we can quarrel over approaches to solving the problem of transport, but it's not that your people, my people, these people. Politicians have exploited this very, very badly for Nigeria. I mean, there were these tendencies, but again, I like to go back. History teaches us so much. Two men of Nigerian history, H.O. Davis and Nnamdi Azikiwe, were on two different sides of the political divide, campaigning strongly for their sides. But every evening, almost back in those days, because I had the privilege of knowing them, I was a young person. Chief Davis' son was my classmate and good friend. They would come together and go and play tennis, drink beer, come back. The following morning, they go campaigning on the opposite sides. You don't see that civility anymore in Nigeria because we don't focus on issues. We focus on persons, and then we take it to ethnicities, and then we take it to religion. These divisive things. Emotion now trumps reason. I like to encourage people to read Moral Tribes, a book by a Harvard professor who runs the Center for Moral Cognition. And Joshua Green, talks using the subtitle of the book, Emotion, Reason, and the Gap Between Us and Them. We're just looking at gaps between us and them, quarreling. I have difficulty understanding ethnicity. I grew up in Nigeria. All of my primary education in northern Nigeria, born in Kaduna and all of that. Started secondary education in eastern Nigeria. Did the bulk of my secondary education in western Nigeria. And went back east to go to university. And so when I see the kind of extreme ethnic baiting that's going on in Nigeria now, I wonder, is this Nigeria that I grew up in? So politicians are responsible for selfish reasons. And if the media doesn't hold them accountable for that conduct, then the media has failed. That's part of the challenge of Nigeria.
Because of time, now let's look at the issues that has to do with the economy now, because that's part of your area of expertise. Now, what do you make of some of the decisions, the monetary policies made in recent times by the CBN, talking about the devaluation of the naira, the floating of the naira, and also how the CBN is tackling the inflation in recent times. What would be your take on some of these decisions, the aftermath, and then what should be the narrative for the CBN to ensure that you have stability in the economy?
Well, unfortunately, there was a lot of cleaning up that needed to be done at the central bank because of the general trajectory of things in the 8 years before that. I do think that the central bank should become more focused on monetary policy and managing inflation. In the last regime, it claimed that nobody was working on fiscal policy. So central bank literally took over the fiscal policy space and a big mess was made of things. I think there's still weakness, serious weakness with fiscal policy right now in the country. There's an absence of rigor in how we make decisions. That's why policies are revised almost every week. There should be thorough consultation. The public policy process is marked by what a policy scholar back in my days in the 70s from University of California in Berkeley, Aaron Wildawski, refers to as complex redundancy. If you make a decision and change it every week, as seems to be the tradition of the current order in Nigeria, then you don't have rigor in process. That's what complex redundancy is supposed to help you achieve. There are goals that can be pursued, but those goals should be paced. I don't think that trying to float the naira, remove subsidies, all of it in one day, big bang, is necessarily the most effective way to go about those things. But the policy sense and general thrust is reasonable as the direction we should travel, but implementation and problem subsequencing have led to very, very terrible consequences for ordinary people. And we must show that sensitivity in planning. I also don't see the passion in fiscal reorientation. I mean, we know that at the bottom line of exchange rate and all of those is productivity, output. What are we doing to really generate passion for producing? I don't see those initiatives. I mean, I go back to General Obasanjo as a young military officer, head of state. Oil prices, take it deep. What does he do? First of all, recognizes that costs need to be cut. Boom. Head of state goes down to driving Peugeot 504 maximum. Everybody else goes below that on the cost side. On the stimulation of production side, initiatives like the Operation Feed the Nation, get everybody there, farming and producing. Let's see what we can do. I don't see any grand program initiatives to stimulate production. I don't see any seriousness to cut costs. And so you get the kind of challenge that we have right now. We must be passionate and implement these things really with love in our hearts for the people. To lead is to love.
Policies and initiatives that would change the fortunes of Nigerians, that they can relate to and say these are the dividends of democracy. There is global tension leading to disruption in supply chain. Now, the president has said that he wants to lead Nigerians through democracy. Democracy has begotten us institutions that will lead Nigeria to the destination that is profound. So how can these institutions, by extension sectors, look inward and maximize the opportunities that have come from the disruption in global supply chain and even global the global tensions now, geopolitical tensions? How can these institutions and sectors look inwards and maximize this for Nigeria's gain to get Nigeria to its profound destination?
Yeah, and this is really the point I was making about having a clear strategy and champions to drive that strategy. Take an example. If what Nigeria wants to do is mitigate a certain production challenge in, let's say, sesame seeds, we have to look at our factor endowments. What are we gifted with by nature that we can become the strongest global players in if we develop their value chains? If we then recognize our latent comparative advantage, as structural economists will call it, then we find champions. I mean, serious-minded people will say, look, you're a sesame seed champion. Your goal is to raise the production of processed sesame seed in Nigeria by 1,000% in 2 years. Something that is a stretch. And the best capable person available, Nigerian, whether he's abroad or here, is found to do it. Not some crony that you just want to call minister or something. Then that guy knows that this is his target. He literally goes to the streets, works with state governors, divides up land and says, this is what you get, this is your incentive, begin to produce, looks for all the networking that facilitates those clusters, and you will see activity and you will see outcomes. But just to stay in one place and be making propaganda will not get you anywhere. You will just go around and come back to the same stories that we are telling. So we have to begin by identifying the particular products or produce based on our factor endowments we want to become champions of. Find the right people to drive those particular initiatives, set them targets, hold them accountable, fire those that don't perform, bring in fresh blood. That's the way you change things.
Thank you, Prof. As we near the close of this conversation, we would like to touch on rule of law, justice, and the role of the judiciary. So President Tinubu has repeatedly, expressed his intention to abide by the rule of law, embrace diverse opinions. And in fact, we've seen that some of the political trials that he inherited from former President Buhari's administration, he is discontinuing them. Shore's case has been discontinued, and a couple of other unfair trials, so to speak. But what do you make of this? Do you think that this now means that we're on the right path and that the judiciary will now return to his role as the arbiter of justice?
The cause célèbre is Nnamdi Kanu. Why has that not been dealt with? Look, we have to be very honest to ourselves. The judiciary has gone way wrong, and needs to be reformed. Somebody that writes brilliantly about this is Chidi Odinkalu, Professor Odinkalu. If you just read his columns on the judiciary, you will see what needs to be done around that subject. I think that there's too much showboating, too much sense of we got to show rather than a principled focus on getting certain things done. I think that society cannot make progress without strong institutions, and the biggest anchor of institutions, the rule of law, is the expectation that justice will come to those who engage. And this is why judicial reform is so fundamental for Nigeria. We got it wrong for some time. We've had it wrong. And so we need to do something that dramatically changes the course of the Nigerian judicial system.
The minimum wage conversation, it seems like labor and unions rather have been having this back and forth with the federal government. And we are hearing the governors forum come with different digits as to what each government can pay. What's your take on moving forward? What should be? Should we unify our minimum wage? And what the government is putting forward, do you think it is sustainable and practicable?
This is a complex conversation that is nuanced and needs to be understood properly, but you must draw your parameters. First of all, there's a way we treat this whole minimum wage thing as if it's a gift that you hand out. People need to work and need to be paid appropriately for their output. The civil service, I mean, bright, very, very bright mind called Joe Abba likes to argue the counterpoint that the civil service is not too bloated. However, the question is, what is productivity in the civil service? How many people show up for work, and what is their output? If we recognize that productivity is critical to a conversation around wages, then we would approach this whole conversation slightly differently than we are doing it. We are doing it in the prebendal mindset of, hey, boss, give me my prebend. So it becomes, look, my standard of living has gone down because you have had inflation. So pay me 10 times more. You say, no, take 6 times more. No, it should be more, much better done than that. I think that people should work and get paid for work done. We need to revamp the public service. And government doesn't have to be the benchmark source of compensation. Look, there are people who are happy earning much lower than minimum wage in the private sector in some places. But once you say government has put this as benchmark, then everybody's obliged to. So I think we should rethink the whole minimum wage thing. The states, the regions used to even pay more than the federal government back in the 60s, Western region.
We just have to wrap up now. We wish we could have enough time to still have more conversations with you, but we assure you we're going to have you another time. There will be another time to look at some of these critical issues. But we must appreciate you for your time. In fact, it's quite commendable on your part that you had to stay late or stay awake to be able to catch up with this conversation. And that's patriotic on your part. We want to appreciate you for your time and your commitment and your thoughts on this special, on June 12 special. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your thought with us on our program.
Great pleasure.
Exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.